Chapter 12. Dr. Elijah Pearson Comes to Shiloh. The Sunday that Dr. Elijah Pearson first visited Shiloh Baptist began like every other summertime morning in Macon County. The sun rose early, stretching long fingers of gold across the fields. The cicadas were already loud, humming their endless music from the trees. Mothers hung clothes in the backyard before the heat grew heavy. Fathers washed their hands after chores and reached for starched shirts. Children scrubbed their faces and tried not to wrinkle what they wore. Shiloh Baptist stood at the center of it all, white siding catching the light, its bell rope swaying gently outside the door. On any given Sunday, the church was a place of comfort, a place of familiar faces and familiar prayers. People came early to talk about crops or weather or what the reverend might preach. They came to see neighbors, exchange news, and hear the choir raise a sound that softened the rough edges of the week. No one expected the stranger in the crisp white suit standing outside the church steps. He stood tall and still, with the quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to. His dark skin shone in the sunlight, and his hat was pulled low over his brow. A small black doctor's bag rested at his feet. He looked neither anxious nor overly proud, just composed, like a man carrying the weight of a purpose he intended to fulfill. People noticed him immediately. Men coming up the church steps murmured to their wives. Mothers tightened their grip on their children's hands. The choir director lifted her chin curiously. Even the reverend paused on his way inside and stared for a moment before offering a polite nod. James arrived a few minutes later with Sarah and little Isaac. His father and brothers followed behind them, dressed in their Sunday best. Isaac tugged at his suspenders, looking around with bright curiosity. "Who is that man, Daddy?" Isaac asked. James looked toward the stranger. "I do not know yet." Sarah studied the man for a moment. She had a way of sensing people quickly. Sometimes she trusted that instinct too much, sometimes too little. Today she felt something she could not yet name, something like caution. They stepped inside, but the stranger remained outside the door until the service began. Only then did he enter, closing the door softly behind him. He took a seat in the very last pew, setting his bag beside him. His posture was straight, but not rigid. He did not fidget. He simply watched. When the choir rose, Sarah lifted her voice with the others. Her clear tone drifted through the sanctuary, rising above the harmonies as naturally as breath. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the stranger lift his head slightly, as if her voice had found him where he sat. The reverend preached on steadfastness and the blessings that come from trust. It was a sermon he had given before, though he shaped it differently this morning, speaking about community and the way God often sends help in unexpected forms. People said "Amen" softly. When the service ended, the stranger waited until the congregation began filing out. Then he stood, lifted his black doctor's bag, and approached the reverend. James, standing near the doorway, watched as the two men shook hands. The reverend looked surprised, but not displeased. That alone made people lean in closer without seeming to. "I am Dr. Elijah Pearson," the stranger said in a calm voice that carried easily. A ripple went through the crowd. A doctor, and a black doctor at that. In Macon County, it was rare enough to see a black physician anywhere, much less standing in Shiloh Baptist in a suit that looked like it had been pressed only moments before. The reverend nodded respectfully. "Welcome, Dr. Pearson. What brings you to us?" Pearson removed his hat and held it against his chest. "I have come on behalf of the Public Health Service and the John A. Andrew Hospital at Tuskegee. We are partnering to improve health care for men in this region. I wanted to introduce myself and speak with the community." People edged closer. James's father frowned slightly. His brothers stood still behind him. Sarah felt Isaac shift beside her, sensing tension even if he did not understand it. The reverend scratched his chin. "Are you here about the visits we heard rumors of? Government doctors coming around?" "Yes," Pearson replied. "I have been sent to ensure those visits are handled respectfully. The government is concerned about health issues affecting black men in rural communities. We intend to provide examinations, tests, and medicine at no cost." A murmur of interest swept through the room. No cost, free care. In a place where sickness often meant choosing between food and medicine, those words struck deep. James felt something warm flicker in his chest. He had known men who avoided doctors because money was tight or because distance made help feel too far away. He thought of his father's worn hands, of neighbors who coughed all winter without seeing anyone for it. A black doctor offering free help at Shiloh sounded almost like an answer to prayer. But not everyone felt the same. One older man near the back muttered softly to his wife. Another whispered to his grown son. A few women exchanged uncertain glances. They had lived long enough to know that help sometimes came with strings, invisible at first glance. Sarah touched James's arm gently, her fingers curling with the faintest pressure. "We should hear him out," she murmured. James nodded. The Reverend gestured for Pearson to speak to the congregation as they gathered outside under the shade of the pecan trees. Pearson stepped forward with a kind of quiet authority that made people listen almost without choosing to. "I understand that many of you have gone without proper care for too long," he began. "Part of my mission is to bridge that gap. The Public Health Service wants to study health patterns among our people, especially the illness many call bad blood. The government wishes to help, and we are here to make sure that help reaches you." He spoke plainly. He did not announce anything dramatic. He did not promise things he could not deliver. His voice held the confidence of a man who believed what he said, or perhaps he believed enough of it to make the rest sound true. "You will receive examinations," he continued, "treatment if needed, follow-up, blood tests, and, if required, more advanced procedures to ensure your long-term health." People nodded. This sounded reasonable, even hopeful. James felt his brothers shift beside him, both watching Pearson closely. His father asked the first question. "Why here?" he said, folding his arms across his chest. "Why now?" Pearson looked at him without flinching. "Because rural men are often overlooked. You work hard, you take care of your families, and you put your own health last. The government knows this. Tuskegee knows this. They asked for volunteers from the medical community. I stepped forward." James's father stared at him for a long moment, then gave a small, slow nod. Pearson extended his hands as if offering something invisible but real. "What we ask is simple. Allow us to examine you. Allow us to help. Allow us to learn from you so that future generations may benefit from what we discover." The sentence fell softly but carried far. Future generations, a phrase that reached the hearts of fathers, not just individuals. Sarah looked down at Isaac, who was crouching in the grass near her feet, pushing a stick through the dirt. She brushed his hair back from his forehead, her mind lingering on Pearson's words in ways she did not yet understand. Someone else spoke up. "Did the government send white doctors too?" Pearson smiled politely. "Yes, and I work alongside them. But I am here because I know how important it is for our people to see someone who understands our experiences. Someone who knows our churches, our families, our lives." A warmth spread through the crowd. Representation did that. It softened people. It lowered walls. James felt that softening in his own chest. If a black doctor said the government was sincere, then maybe it was. Maybe for once they were not using colored folks, but trying to help them. Maybe the world was not always stacked against them. Maybe this time was different. But not everyone softened. James's brother Nathan narrowed his eyes. "What exactly do these tests do?" he asked. Pearson answered smoothly. "Blood tests tell us what illnesses are present. They help us decide what treatment you might need. Some men may receive injections or additional assessments, but it is all routine and all safe." Routine, safe, words that sounded comforting because he spoke them calmly. Evelyn Whitford arrived minutes later, walking briskly across the churchyard in her clean white uniform. She nodded to Pearson in greeting, though her eyes flickered with something unreadable. James noticed it. Sarah noticed it. A few others did too, though they could not yet interpret what they saw. Pearson stepped aside and let Evelyn speak briefly. "I will be working alongside Dr. Pearson and the other physicians," she said. "Some of you know me already. I hope to see many of you at the clinic visits this week." Her voice was steady, but James sensed tension beneath it. Pearson resumed speaking. "We are here to serve the community, to make healthcare accessible, to build trust." Trust. Another word that fell heavy, though no one yet knew why. Pearson stayed for nearly an hour, answering questions, shaking hands, assuring people there was nothing to fear. He carried himself like a man weighed down by knowledge but determined to do right. It was that combination that made people follow him with our eyes. He seemed honest. He seemed sincere. When he finally left, walking down the dirt road toward the ford that waited for him, the congregation stood in clusters discussing his words. "He seemed decent," someone said. "He seemed smart," another added. "He seemed like he knew what he was talking about," said a third. "He seemed like one of us," an older woman murmured. And that was the truth of it. He did seem like one of them. A black man with an education who had risen above the obstacles they knew so well. A man who returned to help his own. A man who carried himself with dignity and purpose. A man whose presence made them believe the government's intentions were honorable. Sarah walked beside James as they left the churchyard. She pushed a lock of hair behind her ear and looked over her shoulder at the road where Pearson had disappeared. "You trust him?" she asked softly. James considered the question. "He seems like a good man." "Maybe," she murmured, "maybe." But her voice carried a wisp of uncertainty, thin as a strand of smoke. James took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You heard what he said. They want to help us. Nobody gives free nothing without reason. Maybe this is the reason." Sarah nodded but did not speak. Her silence held more meaning than words could. Isaac tugged at her dress. "Mama, can we go home?" "Yes, baby," she said, picking him up. "We are going." Behind them, the church bell sounded once, deep and low, echoing across the fields. A sound that would later haunt James, though he could not know it then. Later that evening, Dr. Pearson sat alone in his boarding room near Tuskegee, staring at the stack of government papers on his small desk. He read the same paragraphs over and over, searching for reassurance he could no longer find. His hand hovered above the folder before pulling away. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and whispered to the empty room, "Please, let this be what they say it is." He wanted to believe. He needed to believe. But something in him had shifted today, something he could not yet explain. And far away, in a house lit by a single lamp, James sat with his wife and child, replaying Pearson's words the same way Pearson now replayed his own doubts. One man believing the government wanted to help, one man fearing he had stepped into something else entirely. And between them, the people of Macon County stood on the edge of a future they did not ask for, a future that would begin with trust and end with betrayal. Chapter 13. The Rejected Soldier. Word traveled through Macon County the way it always had, moving from front porch to general store, from the fields to the church pews. By late summer, the talk that spread fastest was the draft. The Army needed men. The war overseas was burning hotter by the day, stretching across oceans and borders, swallowing young men by the thousands. But for families in Macon County, the idea of a steady wage and regular meals felt like a door cracked open in a dark hallway. That was how the idea first entered James's mind, not as patriotism, not as adventure, but as a chance, a clean chance at something stable. He mentioned it to Sarah in the quiet evening light as they sat at the kitchen table, listening to Isaac hum to himself while drawing pictures on the floor. "What would you think," James began carefully, "if I tried to enlist?" Sarah looked up slowly, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. She lowered it back into the bowl. "Enlist," she repeated. "Yes," he said, steadying his voice. "The Army pays regular, sends money home, gives training, maybe even education." Sarah studied him, her eyes soft but searching. "Is this because of how you have been feeling?" she asked quietly. James shook his head. It is because I want better for us, for you, for Isaac. The woodyard is not enough. It never has been. I have been thinking about this for a while." That was not entirely true. He had not been thinking about it long, but ever since the examination at Shiloh, something had stirred inside him, a restlessness, a desire to take control before something unanswered took control of him. Sarah reached for his hand. "You would be leaving us." "For a time," he admitted. "And if something happens to you, people die right here at home, too," he said softly. "Sometimes for nothing at all." She stared at him, her jaw trembling slightly. "You think this is the answer?" "I think it is the best chance we have right now," he said. "I think it is a way to break the pattern, a way for me to give you and Isaac something steady." Sarah looked at Isaac, whose small hand traced crooked shapes on a scrap piece of paper. She swallowed hard. "I do not want you to go," she whispered. "But I want you to have more than what this place gives you, and I want Isaac to have more than both of us had." James squeezed her hand. "Then say yes." She closed her eyes for a moment, tears gathering at the corners. When she opened them again, she nodded. "Yes," she said. "If it can help our family, yes." James let out a breath he had not realized he had been holding. Sarah rose from her chair and came around the table. She wrapped her arms around him, resting her head against his shoulders. "You always try to do right," she said. "I see that, and I love you for it." He held her tightly. "You and me," he whispered. She kissed his cheek. "Together forever." The next morning, James woke with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The sun had barely risen when he dressed in his best shirt and trousers. Sarah had pressed them the night before, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the cloth. She prepared a small breakfast, but he barely ate. His stomach twisted with nerves and hope. As he stepped outside, Sarah handed him a small handkerchief. "For luck," she said. He kissed her forehead. "I will return before midday." Isaac ran up to him and wrapped his arms around his leg. "Daddy going to work?" James lifted him into his arms. "Something like that." He hugged the boy tightly before setting him down again. Sarah watched silently as James walked down the road. The Army Testing Center was set up temporarily in a municipal building near the courthouse. Men from across the county waited in a long line outside, their faces a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and pride. James recognized several from the woodyard. Others he knew from Sunday service or the general store. They spoke loudly to mask their nerves. "Steady money coming our way, boys," one man bragged. "Long as you pass that test," another laughed. James offered small nods and quiet greetings, but his mind was elsewhere. His heart thudded heavily in his chest. Inside the building, the air smelled of bleach, sweat, and paper. Wooden benches lined the waiting room. A clerk behind a desk handed out forms and directed men to different stations. When James's name was called, he stepped forward. Several examinations followed in quick succession. Weight, height, hearing test, vision test. He passed each one. Finally, a doctor with silver hair of a sharp expression gestured toward a room at the back. Blood test next. James felt the first crack of worry. He sat down, rolled up his sleeve, and waited. The doctor tied a band around his arm, found a vein, and slid the needle in. James winced. The blood flowed into a vial. The doctor paused before labeling it. His brow furrowed. He held the sample up to the light, then glanced at James. "Did you receive medical care recently?" the doctor asked. James swallowed hard. "Yes, a checkup at Shiloh Baptist Church." "With whom?" "Doctors from the Public Health Service," James said. The doctor nodded stiffly and wrote something on a form. "What is it?" James asked. The doctor ignored the question. "You may wait outside." James walked into the hallway with his pulse pounding in his ears. Minutes later, a sergeant appeared at the door holding a clipboard. "James." James stepped forward. The sergeant cleared his throat. "You have been medically disqualified from service." James felt the words slam against him. "What? Why?" The sergeant shifted uncomfortably. "Confidential medical reasons." "You have to tell me something," James insisted. "I passed everything else." The sergeant lowered his voice. "Sir, there was a finding in your blood, something that prevents you from enlisting. That is all we can say." James stared at him. "Is it serious?" The sergeant hesitated. "You should see whoever examined you at that church. They would know." James's breath caught. "So whatever they did, whatever they tested, that is what kept me out?" The sergeant's expression remained carefully neutral. "We cannot treat men who are already under another federal medical program." James felt the floor tilt. "Another federal program? I did not sign up for any program." The sergeant sighed. "Sometimes it is not explained clearly, but the result is the same. You are not eligible." Men nearby looked toward them, whispering. James stepped back, suddenly dizzy. The sergeant handed him a stamped form. A single word burned across the top. "Rejected." James folded the paper in his trembling hand and walked outside. The sunlight felt harsh, almost blinding. The sounds of men laughing and talking swirled around him, but they seemed far away. He sat on the courthouse steps, staring down at his hands. Rejected, because of something in his blood, because of something those doctors had taken from him, because of something he had not understood. His breath came shallow. He had come to this building with hope. He left with fear coiled tight in his chest. On the walk home, the rejection crushed him with every step. His boots scraped the dirt road, his legs stiff and unsteady. He replayed the doctor's words over and over. "You may already be in another federal medical program. Talk to the people at the church." Another federal program? What did that even mean? He felt sick. By the time he reached the house, Sarah was standing on the porch, wringing her hands. When she saw the expression on his face, she hurried down the steps. What happened? James held out the folded paper. She read the stamped word. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No." James sank onto the porch steps. "They said something came up in my blood." Sarah's voice cracked. "Something serious?" "They said I should talk to the men who examined me at the church. Said I might already be under some federal medical care." Sarah froze. Her face drained of color. "Federal?" "Yes." She sat beside him, stunned. "They have power to stop men from enlisting?" James nodded slowly. "They have power over something in me. I do not know what." Sarah's body trembled. "James, what did they put in you? What did they take out? What did they see? Something is wrong. Something is terribly wrong." He pressed his hands to his face. "I just wanted to help us. I wanted to give us something better." She placed her hand on his back. I know you did." He leaned into her touch, feeling broken. Isaac appeared at the door, rubbing his eyes. "Mama, why are you crying?" Sarah quickly wiped her face. "It is all right, baby." James looked at his son, and for the first time since the examination, he felt something deeper than fear. He felt guilt, heavy, crushing, suffocating. That night, they lay in bed without speaking for a long time. The darkness pressed close around them. Finally, Sarah turned onto her side. "Do you regret going?" she whispered. James stared at the ceiling. "More than I can say." She took his hand. "We will get through this." He turned his head and looked at her silhouette in the dim light. "You and me," he whispered. She answered through her tears. "Together forever." But neither of them slept. Neither of them felt safe. And neither of them knew that the rejection from the army was only the beginning of something far more devastating. Chapter 14. The Turner Family Resistance. The day after James returned from the Army draft station, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the thin walls were holding their breath. Morning light pressed through the curtains, pale and tired, and the quiet of the rooms carried an uneasy weight that did not come from sickness or weather, but from the disappointment James had brought home the night before. Sarah watched him from the stove as he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the surface of his coffee. He had barely touched it. His shoulders were slumped, his jaw set in the rigid way it held itself when he was trying not to show emotion. His hands lay flat on the table, palms down, as if steadying himself against the truth he did not want to accept. The army had turned him away, not for lack of strength, not for lack of skill, not even for lack of will. He had gone there believing he had something to offer, that maybe service could bring stability to his young family. But he came home with nothing except a slip of paper with confusing words scribbled on it, and a look in his eyes that Sarah had never seen before. She set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of him. "You need to eat something," she said gently. He nodded, but did not move his hands. Isaac, now 6, sat beside him with eager energy. His feet swung under the table, shoes brushing rhythmically against the chair leg. "Daddy," he said, "you said you were going to get a uniform." James blinked. He tried to smile at his son, but the expression fell before it fully formed. "I did," he said softly, "but the army said no." "Why?" Isaac asked. James opened his mouth, but closed it again, because he still did not know the answer. He had stood in that long line of hopeful men, filled out the same forms as everyone else, gone through the same examinations. Then someone had whispered to another man in a white coat, and his papers were stamped, not with the word he wanted, but with something colder and more final. Not fit for service. James could not make sense of it. Before he could speak, Sarah placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder. "Daddy will explain later," she said. "Eat your breakfast." The child nodded and looked down at his plate. James stared into his coffee again, and Sarah felt something inside her twist. She had seen her husband work through every kind of hardship since she had known him. She had seen him exhausted, bruised, overwhelmed, even heartbroken, but she had never seen him defeated. She crossed the room and placed her hand lightly on his back. "We will talk to your daddy later," she whispered to Isaac again, but the words were meant for her husband. "Let him breathe for now." James finally looked up at her. His eyes were dark, troubled, and full of questions he was not ready to speak aloud. He ate one biscuit, only because she insisted, then stood and said he needed to go see his father. Sarah watched him walk down the road toward the old Turner property, shoulders tense, fists tucked into his pockets. Her heart followed him long after he disappeared from view. James's father, Henry Turner, sat on the porch sharpening a hatchet when he arrived. The rasp of metal against stone echoed through the yard in slow, steady strokes. His brothers, Sam and Franklin, were splitting kindling near the shed, their movements practiced and rhythmic. The place smelled of pine, sap, and sour sweat. Henry looked up when James approached, studied him for a long moment, and then set the hatchet aside. "Well," he said, "you are back sooner than I expected." James swallowed. "They turned me away." His brothers paused mid-swing. Henry leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "What reason did they give?" "None that made sense," James said. "They said something was wrong with my blood." Sam exchanged a glance with Franklin. Henry's face tightened, not with sympathy, but with suspicion. "That is the same thing those government men been saying," he muttered. "Bad blood. Always talking about bad blood." "I do not know what it means," James said. "They would not explain. They just told me I could not serve." Henry motioned for him to sit. James lowered himself onto the porch step. "Listen to me," Henry said, voice low and deliberate. "You do not let that eat at you. The army does not know half of what it is doing. They take one man and leave another for reasons that do not make a lick of sense. But I will tell you what matters. You came home alive. You came home to your family. That is worth more than any uniform." James stared at the ground. He wanted those words to comfort him, but they did not. He had gone to the draft station hoping to bring something back to Sarah, something solid and stable. Instead, he returned with confusion and a hollow ache that he could not shake. His brothers walked over and sat on the porch rail. Sam spoke first. The Army turned away 3 men from the Baptist Hill last month. Said something showed up in their blood, too. But they look healthy, Franklin added. Strong as ever. You think the tests are wrong? James asked quietly. Henry spat into the yard. I think the government is always hiding something, he said. And I do not trust anything that comes with a clipboard and fancy words. Never have. The words sat heavily between them. James hesitated before speaking again. Those doctors came by the other day, he said. Same men that give out the tonics. They said they want us to come back in for more tests. Henry's head snapped toward him, eyes sharp. And you are thinking about going? James hesitated. Sam shook his head. Do not do it. Franklin added. Men been feelin' strange after those visits. Wives talking about their husbands comin' home worn out, complainin' of aches they never had before. Henry leaned forward. Son, he said, voice stern, I raised you to use your judgment. Them men are not healers. They say they are studying something. They say it is for our own good, but I never trusted their words. You do not know what you are signing on to. James rubbed his hands together. They said it would help my family, he murmured, that it could bring us some money and care. His father scowled. That is how they get you. Promise a little comfort, make you think you owe them something. James lowered his eyes. I just want to take care of Sarah and Isaac. I know you do, Henry replied, but the way to care for your family is by standing on your own feet, not bending to people who would use you for their own purpose. James felt something heavy settle in his chest. His father's words held weight, but they did not erase the fear he carried. For the first time since marrying Sarah, he felt powerless to provide. Did those men ask you to go? Franklin asked. They asked everyone, James said. Said they are offering treatment. Said people with bad blood need to be seen. Sam stood up abruptly. Then count me out, he said. I will not have them poking at me. Nor me, Franklin said. Henry leaned back in his chair, looking at James. You hear your brothers, he said, and you hear me. The Turners do not put their trust in strangers who come offering easy answers. James nodded slowly. But inside him, the fight had already begun. When he walked back home later that afternoon, the sun sat low beyond the trees, and the smell of supper drifted through the air. Sarah stood on the porch, plucking peas into a bowl. She looked up when he approached. What did your father say? She asked. James hesitated. He does not trust the doctors, he said. Nor do Sam or Franklin. And you? She asked carefully. He swallowed. I do not know. She set the bowl down. The screen door creaked as it opened, and she stepped closer until she stood just in front of him. James, she said softly, I know you wanted the Army to say yes. I know you wanted to come home with something steady for us. But we still have what matters. We have each other. We have our boy. We can make it work. He looked at her, and something in him ached at the way she carried hope so easily. I do not want to fail you, he said. You do not, she replied. You have not, and you will not. He took her hand, but his eyes drifted away. Those doctors said the same thing, he whispered, that they could help, that working with them would mean something for our family. Sarah's expression shifted. The line between her brows deepened. James, she murmured, I do not feel right about them. Why? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because they come smiling too wide, she said, and because they talk like they know more about our lives than we do. People who truly care do not speak that way. He wanted to agree, but he also remembered the Army rejection, the slip of paper, the confusion, the humiliation. They said it would not cost anything, he murmured, said they would treat me for free, and you know as well as I do, we do not have money for doctors. Free is not always a blessing, she said gently. Sometimes it is bait. James looked away. Behind them, Isaac burst through the door, chasing a firefly that had slipped inside earlier. He giggled as he tried to catch it. The sound was pure, untouched by the concerns of adults. Sarah watched him with soft eyes. "That is why we have to be careful," she said quietly. "We cannot afford to gamble with our lives, not with him watching us." James's heart twisted. He wanted to be the man who made good decisions, the man who led his family with wisdom, the man who protected what he loved. But nothing in his life had prepared him for a choice like this. His father had told him not to trust the government doctors. His brothers had refused without hesitation. Sarah feared the danger of a promise offered too easily. And yet, the words the doctors used echoed in his mind. Help, care, treatment for your family. He did not know that those same words had been spoken in meeting rooms far away by men who studied him like a chart. He only knew he was tired. He only knew he wanted to give Sarah and Isaac a life that was not built on scraping by. He kissed Sarah's forehead. "We will talk about it more," he said. She nodded, but the worry did not leave her eyes. That night, James lay awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep. The window beside their bed was open, and the hum of insects drifted in with the soft breeze. He stared into the darkness, replaying the day in his mind. His father's firm voice, his brother's certainty, Sarah's quiet fear, the army's rejection, the doctor's promises, the word bad blood. He placed a hand over his chest, as if searching for something beneath the skin. He did not know that inside him, something far more dangerous than bad blood was already moving silently. He only knew that tomorrow the doctors would return. And he would need to decide which world to believe, the one his father warned him about, or the one that offered him hope. In the quiet of his small home, with his wife breathing softly beside him and his son sleeping down the hall, James stared into the darkness and felt the weight of the future shift. The Turner family had resisted, but he was slipping, not from weakness, but from desperation, and the men in the white coats knew exactly how to turn desperation into compliance. Chapter 15. Signing Approaches. The summer sun lay heavy across Macon County that week, the kind of weight that made even the early mornings feel swollen and slow. James woke before dawn each day to work in the pulpwood yard with his father and brothers. The work was familiar, a rhythm he had known since he was a boy, but lately even the sawdust-filled air carried a tension he could not shake. He swung the axe with firm, practiced strokes. Wood cracked open in sharp echoes that scattered birds from the treetops. Sweat rolled down his back long before the sun fully rose. His father watched him from across the yard, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. "You are working too hard," Henry called out, "harder than usual." James did not answer at first. He lifted another log, splitting it with a swing that sent it clean in two. "Work helps me think," he finally said. Henry snorted. "Work helps a man forget, not think." James said nothing more. He stacked the cut pieces, his shoulders stiff with unspoken thoughts. Sam and Franklin worked on opposite sides of the yard, exchanging glances when James turned away. They had always known him to be steady, quiet, controlled. But something about him in recent days seemed off balance, as if he were walking along an edge he could not name. By mid-morning, Henry called for a break. They gathered under the shade of a large oak. Henry handed James a tin cup of water. "Those men are coming back soon," Henry said. James froze. "I know," he replied. Henry studied him closely. "And you are thinking about letting them do those tests again?" It was not a question. James ran a hand across his forehead. He looked away. "I do not know," he murmured. Sam let out a low hiss of frustration. "They put ideas in your head," he said, "just like they'd done with the others." "They said they could help," James replied quietly. Franklin stepped forward. "Help with what? They never tell you straight. They smile, they talk soft, but nothing they say truly says what they mean." James swallowed. "They said what happened with the army might be connected," he said at last. Henry leaned forward. "The army turned away healthy men," he said, "strong men, men who could have served fine. You think they know more about you than you do, than I do, than your own body tells you?" James opened his mouth, then closed it. He remembered the army doctor's expression when he looked at James's exam results. He remembered feeling small in that room, like something on a chart instead of a man. "I just want to understand," James whispered. "If something is wrong in me, I want to know." Henry shook his head. "There is nothing wrong with you. What is wrong is the way those men meddle where they should not." Franklin added, "You think they are offering help, but you do not know the cost." James pressed his fingers into his forehead. The conversation was going in circles, pressing into the bruise that had formed inside him since the rejection at the draft station. "I am going home," he said suddenly. Henry frowned. "We are not done for the day." "I will make it up tomorrow." He walked away before anyone could stop him. When he reached his house, Sarah was outside sweeping the porch. She slowed when she saw the look on his face. "Something happened?" "Nothing more than what has already been happening," he said, sitting on the steps. She set the broom aside and sat beside him. "You talked to your father," she said gently. He nodded. "He does not want me to go back to the doctors." "I know. And you do not want me to either." Sarah let out a slow breath. "James," she said carefully, "I want us to be all right. Truly, I do. I want you to be healthy. I want our home to be steady. But I do not trust the way those men speak to you. I do not trust the looks they give when they think no one sees." James said nothing. Sarah reached for his hand. "I know you feel like you failed with the army," she whispered. "But you did not. They chose wrong, not you." He closed his eyes, the hurt rising in him again. "I want to give you more than this," he murmured. "I want to give Isaac more." "You give us your heart," she said. "That is more than most men give anything." He looked at her then, and the depth in her eyes almost broke him. She believed in him so completely. She had trusted him in every season of their life together. But something inside him had shifted when the doctor spoke of treatment, of care, of help without cost. He had never been offered anything for free. He had never had anyone promise something better without asking something in return. And he did not yet know how dangerous that kind of promise could be. Before he could speak, a figure appeared at the end of the road. Nurse Whitford. She walked with her usual careful steps, holding her bag in one hand. When she saw them on the porch, her face softened. "Good afternoon," she called out. Sarah stiffened beside him. The air seemed to shrink. James stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. "Miss Whitford," he greeted politely. Evelyn approached with a professional smile, but her eyes darted between him and Sarah with something like caution or guilt. "I wanted to check on you, Mr. Turner," she said. "We were expecting you at the follow-up last week." James shifted. "I was busy." She nodded. "I understand, but the doctors do want to make sure we keep an eye on things, especially after your Army physical." Sarah's head snapped toward James. "Army physical?" she repeated, the concern rising again. Evelyn's smile wavered, but she pressed on. "It is nothing urgent," she said quickly. "Just routine checks. We want to be sure you stay well." Sarah stepped forward. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Evelyn hesitated. "Because Mr. Turner may have a condition we need to monitor." "What condition?" Sarah asked again. Evelyn softened her tone. "Nothing to worry about." Sarah's eyes hardened. "If it were nothing, you would say what it was." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. Most women in the community did not challenge her. Most trusted her familiar face. But Sarah's love for her husband had sharpened her instincts. "Mrs. Turner," Evelyn said, "I promise you I only want to help." Sarah held her gaze. "Then be honest." Evelyn opened her mouth, but the lie rose before the truth. "As I said," she repeated gently, "it is nothing to worry about. "We just want Mr. Turner to come in for more tests. That is all." James looked down at his hands. A strange heat rose in his chest, a blend of embarrassment and confusion. Sarah looked at him, sadness flickering in her eyes. Evelyn saw the shift, and she sensed the tension between them. Her next words were deliberate. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "you are a good man. You work hard. You take care of your family. Let us take care of you in return." That sentence struck him more deeply than any other. Let us take care of you. It was the exact thing he had been praying for. Sarah stepped closer, but Evelyn smoothly placed a hand on James's forearm before she could speak. "Just come in," she said. "Sign the paper. It is simple. It ensures we can treat you properly." Sarah's voice rose, fragile but fierce. "James," she murmured, "please do not do this." He looked at her. Her eyes were wide. Her jaw trembled slightly. She looked like the same young woman he had married, full of hope and fear all at once. But he also saw Isaac in the doorway, watching him. His big brown eyes waited for something steady, something strong, something a father ought to give. James turned back to the nurse. "What happens if I do not sign?" he asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated. Her supervisors had prepared her for this question. "It will make it harder for us to help you," she said, "and you may not receive the care you need later." Sarah sucked in a breath. "That sounds like a threat." "It is not," Evelyn said, too quickly, but the harm was already done. James felt the world tilt. If he signed, he might get help. If he refused, he might lose his chance. He thought of Sarah sitting up nights, worrying. He thought of Isaac growing older without a father strong enough to guide him. He thought of the army doctor's rejection. He thought of the shame. He looked at his hands. The calluses were deep. The lines were worn. He was tired. He looked at Sarah again. Her eyes begged him not to. But somewhere inside him, something had already cracked. "I will come in," he said quietly. Sarah's lips parted as if she had been struck. Evelyn nodded, relief washing over her face. "We will expect you tomorrow morning at Shiloh," she said. "Bring the form. We will have everything prepared." She turned and walked away before Sarah could speak. Silence settled like dust. James did not look at his wife. He could not. "James," Sarah whispered. He closed his eyes. "I have to do something," he murmured. "We need help. I need answers." "No," she said softly. "You need to listen to your heart, and your heart is telling you to be careful." "I am doing this for us," he said. Tears filled her eyes, quiet and slow. "Then why does it feel like you are leaving us behind?" He had no answer. She stepped back, one hand pressed to her chest, as if holding herself steady. When she finally spoke again, her voice was cracked at the edges. "Do not sign anything until you talk to me again," she said. "Promise me that much." He hesitated, then nodded, but the promise was thin, already fraying. He knew it, she knew it. She turned and went inside, wiping her cheeks with the edge of her apron. James stayed on the porch long after the sun dipped toward the trees. He did not know that the next sunrise would pull him across a line he could never step back over. He only knew that tomorrow he would walk to Shiloh, and the signing would no longer be a question. It would be a turning. Chapter 16. The Examination at Shiloh. Shiloh Baptist Church sat quiet beneath the morning light, its white paint catching the sun in a way that made the wooden boards glow. The old bell in the tower hung still, waiting for Sunday when hands would pull the rope and send its voice across the fields. Today, the church was not a house of worship. It had been borrowed for something else, something quieter, something the community whispered about in yards and on front porches. James approached slowly. His feet felt heavier than they had the day before, as if the road itself wanted to pull him back toward home. He had risen before dawn. Sarah had remained in bed, her eyes open, watching him quietly from the dimness. She had not spoken when he dressed. She had not asked where he was going. She simply held her breath and held herself still, hoping he would change his mind. He had not. The church doors were propped open to let in the breeze. Men stood scattered outside, some pacing, others leaning against the steps. They held their hats in their hands, shifting their weight anxiously. A few nodded at James, but no one spoke first. Finally, Henry Collins approached him. "Morning," Henry said. "Morning." Henry looked him over. "Thought you might not come." James forced a small smile. "Thought about staying home." Henry huffed a laugh without humor. "We all did." The two fell into a quiet that felt heavier than the heat. Men were not used to discussing things they could not explain. They talked about crops, about tools, about weather that refused to rain. But this, what lay behind those church doors, lived in another category entirely. It was half rumor, half promise, and half fear. A door creaked inside. Someone called out a name. One man stepped up the stairs and disappeared inside. Henry exhaled slowly. "You want to know the truth," he muttered, leaning close. "I wish I had the sense to walk the other way." James frowned. "Then why are you here?" Henry stared at the church, jaw tight. "Because I got 3 children who need me," he said quietly. "And if these men can help, even a little, I cannot risk turning it away." James swallowed. "That is how I feel too." Henry nodded. "Then let us do this." They walked in together. Inside the church, the sanctuary had been rearranged. The wooden pews had been pushed aside to clear the center aisle. A long table sat at the front with papers stacked neatly across it. Metal folding chairs lined the wall. The smell of floor polish mixed with something sharper, something chemical. Nurse Whitford stood near the pulpit, organizing forms. When she looked up and saw James, relief softened her features. "Mr. Turner," she said warmly, "thank you for coming." James nodded. His mouth was dry, his palms slick. Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice so the others could not hear. "You made the right decision," she said gently. He hoped she was right. Behind her, 2 white physicians moved between tables, discussing equipment in low tones. One adjusted his spectacles, the other set out vials and instruments with clinical precision. Their presence made the church feel smaller, as if their white coats absorbed all the air around them. Evelyn gestured toward the table. "You can sign the authorization here. Once you do, we can begin the examination." James hesitated. Sarah's voice echoed faintly in his mind. "Do not sign anything until you talk to me again." His throat tightened, but something inside him had already settled. A kind of resigned determination. The army rejection, the raised eyebrows of the doctor, the constant sense that something was wrong, all of it had brought him here. He reached for the paper. The room seemed to hold still. Henry Collins stood nearby, watching. His hands shook slightly as he held his own form. Other men watched as well, their breaths shallow, their expressions tense. This was not something any of them wanting to do alone. James took a pen. Evelyn pointed to the line. He wrote his name, James. When he lifted the pen again, something shifted in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but a strange feeling of being swept along by a force larger than his own choices. Evelyn collected the form with careful hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. She placed it in a folder marked Turner J. and closed it gently. "Please have a seat. The doctors will call you shortly." James sat in one of the folding chairs along the wall. He watched as another man stepped forward to sign his own paper. The scratch of pen on paper echoed faintly in the sanctuary, louder than it should have been. The doctors moved with calm efficiency. They called men one by one, taking them behind a makeshift partition near the choir stand. Occasionally, a man flinched as equipment clinked or metal pressed against skin. Some emerged looking dazed, others stiff, but all of them returned to sit silently and wait. James's heart pounded. He whispered to himself, "It is just a test, nothing more." But the words did not ease the tightness in his chest. Evelyn approached again. "They are ready for you." He stood slowly. His knees felt unsteady. Evelyn placed her hand gently on his elbow, guiding him toward the partition. "You will do fine," she murmured. He did not answer. Behind the partition, the air felt cooler. A metal cable stood in the center, its surface covered with white sheets. A doctor with silver hair adjusted his gloves. "Mr. Turner," he said without looking up, "please sit." James sat. The doctor moved methodically, checking his pulse, taking his temperature, pressing gently along his ribs. "Any dizziness?" the doctor asked. "No." "Headaches?" "Sometimes." "When do they occur?" "When I work long hours." The doctor made a note. Evelyn stood nearby with a clipboard, watching him carefully, but saying nothing. The doctor continued. "Do you ever feel weakness in your legs?" "No." "Tremors?" "No." "Shortness of breath?" James hesitated. "When I was turned away from the army," he said softly. The doctor nodded. "Understandable." Understandable. The word felt sharp, as if the doctor already knew something James did not. The doctor stepped back. "Now we will conduct a routine blood draw." James nodded. He had expected that part. The doctor tied a band around his arm, tapped gently along the vein, and inserted the needle. James stared straight ahead at the wall. A framed picture of Jesus praying in Gethsemane hung there, faded from years of sunlight. When the blood draw was finished, the doctor placed the vial aside. "Next," he said, "we will schedule you for additional tests in the coming weeks. Some will be more extensive." James's skin prickled. "What kind of tests?" The doctor glanced at Evelyn. She stepped forward. "Nothing to fear," she said softly. "Just routine medical checks to help us understand your condition." James nodded slowly. He tried to steady his breathing. The doctor removed his gloves. "You may rejoin the others," he said. James stood. As he turned to leave, the doctor added something that made him pause. "It is good you came in early," he said. "If your condition progresses, it will be important for us to monitor it closely." Condition. The word echoed in his mind. Condition. A word that did not match the soft assurances Evelyn had given. A word that sounded heavier, more permanent, more dangerous. James walked out with a hollow feeling in his chest. The sanctuary looked different when he returned. Men sat quietly, many staring at the floor, as if some unspoken weight had settled over them all at once. Henry approached him. "You all right?" James nodded. "I think so." Henry sat beside him. "Feels strange," he said, "sitting in church like this. Feels like something is wrong." James looked at the pulpit. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass painted the floor in warm colors, too beautiful for a day like this. Henry leaned closer. "My wife told me to come home early," he said. "Said she did not like the look of the men at the last visit. Said she had a dream about sickness." James nodded. "Sarah does not trust this either." Henry gave a nervous laugh. "Women know things we do not." They sat quietly until Evelyn stepped forward again. "Thank you for your patience, gentlemen," she said. "You may go home for now. We will contact you with the schedule for your next visit." Her smile was warm, but her eyes seemed dimmer than before, as if something in her had begun to crack under its own weight. James walked outside with Henry. The sun hit them both hard. "You going to tell your wife?" Henry asked. James swallowed. "Yes." "You sure?" He hesitated. "I do not want to hide anything," he said, "but I do not know how she will take it." Henry nodded. "Same for all of us." They reached the road and split off in separate directions. James walked home slowly, each step heavier than the last. The sound of cicadas filled the air, a loud chorus that made his thoughts even harder to organize. When he reached the porch, Sarah was waiting. She stood in the doorway, her eyes already searching his face. She knew. Before he spoke, she knew. He stepped onto the porch. She reached for his hand. "Did you sign?" she asked softly. James closed his eyes. "Yes." She let out a single quiet breath, almost a sigh, almost a cry. She did not speak. He wished she would. She squeezed his hand, but he could feel her trembling. "You are home," she finally whispered. It was the last gentle thing she said that day. He wished he had understood then how far from home they were about to drift. Chapter 17. The First Crack. The days after the examination at Shiloh slipped by quietly at first, as if the world had decided to pretend nothing had happened. The fields still called to James at dawn, the mules still brayed impatiently at the fence, and the familiar rhythm of wood chopping and well-water lifting kept his hands and mind busy. From a distance, life appeared unchanged. Yet inside the Turner household, something subtle had shifted, something small but steady, like the first thin line appearing on a piece of glass long before it breaks. Sarah moved through the house with an attentiveness James had never seen in her before, watching him with a focus that made him feel both protected and exposed. She asked him how he felt more often. She pressed her hand to his forehead once for no reason at all. When he reached for a bucket or a tool, she glanced up sharply, as if expecting him to sway. He tried to brush it off at first. "I am fine, Sarah," he told her one morning as he tied his boots. She did not answer. She simply tightened the apron around her waist and continued stirring the pot on the stove. She had always been a quiet woman, but this quiet was different. It was too still, too watchful. When he picked up his hat to leave for the fields, she placed a hand on his arm. "James," she said softly, "tell me again what they said." He looked at her, studying the worry lining her forehead. "They said it was a routine check," he repeated. "That is all." She continued staring. "And the papers?" "I signed," he admitted. Her hand tightened slightly. "Do you understand everything you signed?" she asked. He paused. "I did not see anything to be afraid of." She lowered her eyes. "You did not answer what I asked." Her voice was not angry. It was tired in a way he had not heard before. He reached for her chin, lifting it gently so she would look at him. "I did what I thought was right," he said. "For us, for Isaac, for the future." Her lashes trembled. She nodded, but her eyes did not soften. She pulled her chin away and went back to the stove. James stepped outside, feeling heavier than when he woke. That evening at Shiloh Baptist, the choir practiced hymns for Sunday. Sarah stood at the front, her voice rising clear and smooth above the others. James sat in the back pew with Isaac, listening. Sarah always sang with a steadiness that filled the room like warm light. She had joined the choir as a shy girl, too quiet to speak much, but when she opened her mouth to sing, it was as though her soul stepped forward while the rest of her hid gently behind. Tonight, she sang beautifully, but her eyes kept drifting toward James. Whenever she did, her voice wavered slightly. When rehearsal ended, one of the older women, Miss Geraldine, approached Sarah with a smile. "You sounded lovely tonight," she said. Sarah tried to smile back. "Thank you." "You all right, child?" Miss Geraldine asked. "You look like you got something on your mind." Sarah hesitated. She glanced toward James, who was helping Isaac with his coat. "I am just tired," she replied. "Long week." Miss Geraldine nodded knowingly. Young wives always worry themselves tired. Comes with the job. Sarah gave a polite laugh, but her eyes remained troubled. On the walk home, the road was quiet, except for the soft chirping of crickets. Isaac skipped ahead, stopping every few steps to poke at something in the dust or chase a grasshopper. James and Sarah walked slowly. "You still thinking about the study?" he asked lightly. Sarah glanced at him, but did not speak. "Say something," he whispered. She folded her arms tightly across her chest. "I am thinking about you." "I told you I am all right." "I know what you told me," she said. "But you are my husband. I know when something is not right." He frowned. "What is not right?" She stopped walking, forcing him to stop with her. "Your eyes," she said quietly. James blinked. "My eyes? What about them?" "You are squinting more," she said. "Last night you held the Bible closer than usual. This morning you held Isaac's spelling lesson almost against your nose." James's throat went dry. "I have been tired." "Do not lie to me," she whispered. "Not about this." He looked down the road, trying to gather his thoughts. Maybe it is nothing, maybe just strain. Strain does not come overnight. Strain does not make you step wrong twice this week. He bristled. "You counting my steps now?" "Do not turn this on me," she said firmly. "I am scared, James." The words hung between them, raw and honest. James softened. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her back. "I am scared too," he admitted. Her shoulders shook. She pressed her forehead against his chest. "Then let us face it together," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her, but something inside him felt hollow. A small, cold truth had begun to bloom deep inside his chest. What if something really was wrong? And what if he had just put his name on a paper promising more of it? 2 days later, Evelyn Whitford arrived at their door. She came on foot, carrying her leather bag and wearing a soft smile, though her eyes looked tired. She greeted Sarah warmly, asked about her singing, complimented Isaac on how tall he was getting, but her eyes kept searching for James. He stepped onto the porch. "Nurse Whitford." "Mr. Turner," she said, keeping her voice bright, "I came to check on a few things." Sarah stood behind the screen door, watching. "What things?" James asked cautiously. Evelyn shifted her bag. "Routine follow-up. The doctors want to keep an eye on early indicators." Sarah stepped out quickly. "What indicators?" Evelyn hesitated. "Just standard measures," she said. "Nothing to alarm you." Sarah crossed her arms. "What did you see at the church?" she demanded. "What did you tell my husband?" Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her composure wavered slightly. She had been trained to navigate questions gently. This was not gentle territory. "There were some results," she said carefully. "We prefer to monitor them early." "What results?" Sarah repeated. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She looked down, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I cannot discuss specifics." "Then why are you here discussing him?" Sarah shot back. Evelyn raised her eyes. "I am here because I care about your husband's health." Sarah stepped closer. "Then tell him what you see. Do not stand here smiling like nothing is wrong." James placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "Let her talk." Evelyn exhaled slowly, as if deciding something. "Your blood work," she said to James, "showed patterns consistent with what we call bad blood." James stiffened. Sarah's face drained of color. "But we want to monitor it more closely," Evelyn added quickly. "This is why the next round of tests is important. They will help us track any changes." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why did you not say this at the church?" Evelyn swallowed. "Because people panic when they hear words before they understand them." Sarah stepped back. "You think we cannot understand?" "No," Evelyn said gently. "I think you deserve clarity, and clarity requires time." James rubbed his forehead. "So what does this mean for me?" "It means," Evelyn softly, "you need to return in 2 weeks. The doctors will do a spinal procedure. It is painful, but it gives them better readings." Sarah gasped as though struck. "No," she said immediately. "He is not doing anything to his spine." Evelyn looked pained. "Sarah, please. Many have done it. We will help him through it." James felt the world tilt slightly. "A spinal test?" "Yes," Evelyn murmured. "It is routine." "Routine?" Sarah snapped. "Then why did no one say it last time?" Evelyn had no answer. James looked between them, his chest tightening. He felt trapped between 2 women who cared for him in different ways, one pleading with him, one persuading him, and both tugging at something fragile inside him. "I will think about it," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded, though worry flashed in her eyes. "I will come back in a few days." Sarah did not respond. Evelyn walked away slowly. James watched her go, feeling parts of himself unravel in quiet threads. When he turned, Sarah was already crying. She sank onto the porch step, covering her face with both hands. "Lord, help me," she whispered. "Lord, help us." James kneeled beside her. He touched her shoulder gently. She leaned into him, trembling. "What have we done?" she whispered. He did not answer, because, for the first time, he did not know. That night, the house felt colder. Sarah lay with her back turned to him, her breathing uneven. James lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock on the table. Every few minutes, he blinked and blinked again, trying to clear the fog from his eyes. It did not clear. He lifted a hand, holding it a few inches in front of his face. It looked blurred, edges soft and uncertain. His heart thudded painfully. He rolled onto his side, facing Sarah's back. "Are you awake?" he whispered. "Yes," she answered without turning. He reached for her, placing his hand on her waist. She took his hand in hers and held it tightly. "We will get through this," he said. She nodded faintly. But even as he said it, James felt a quiet truth pressing into his bones. The cracks had begun, and neither of them knew how deep they would go. Chapter 18. The Night the House Held Its Breath. Evening settled slowly over Macon County, turning the fields outside the Turner home into long stretches of fading gold. The cicadas hummed steadily in the trees, their song rising and falling like a tired heartbeat. The walls of the house held the day's warmth, and the scent of baked cornbread still lingered in the kitchen from supper. It was the kind of night that ought to have brought peace, yet something unsettled moved beneath the quiet. James sat at the edge of the bed, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together as if holding on to something that kept slipping through his fingers. There was a heaviness in his chest that he could not explain. It was not pain exactly, it was something deeper, something he could feel but could not name, like a storm beginning far beyond the horizon. Sarah stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the faint lamplight from the hall. She watched him for a moment before stepping into the room. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath her steps. She had spent the day pretending she was not worried, but the truth clung to her expression. Their home had always been a place of steadiness, a place where they could laugh, argue, love, and grow without fear. Yet tonight it felt fragile, as if one wrong breath might crack the walls. "You went quiet again," she said gently. "You have been quiet all evening." James lifted his gaze to her, but did not speak. His throat felt dry, as if the words he wanted to say were stuck behind a wall inside him. Sarah came closer. "What is it, James? Tell me what has you carrying yourself like this." He tried to answer, but the thoughts tangled together. He felt tired, though he had not worked the woods that day. He felt anxious, though he had no reason he could point to. He felt ashamed, though he did not know exactly why. "I do not know," he said finally. "I really do not know." Sarah moved to sit beside him. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight. She placed her hand over his, her fingers warm and sure. "Is it the papers you signed?" James closed his eyes. He could still see the pen in his hand, the angle of Nurse Whitford's smile, the promise that everything would be all right, the doctor's calm voices telling him he was doing the right thing, protecting his family. They made the future sound safe, yet none of it had eased the knot in his chest. "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe I should not have signed so fast." "Then why did you?" Sarah asked softly. "Tell me that." He breathed in slowly, the air feeling thick. "Because I wanted to take care of us. I wanted to make things better. I thought this was the way." She looked at him closely. "And now you do not think so?" James hesitated. "I do not know what to think anymore." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the night drifted through the window, a chorus of insects and the distant bark of a hound far down the road. Sarah shifted closer, letting her shoulder touch his. She felt him trembling slightly. "You have been carrying so much alone," she whispered. "Let me carry some of it with you." He shook his head, a slow, uncertain movement. "I do not want to bring my fears into this house." "Your fears already live here," she replied. "I see them even when you do not speak. I feel them in the way you barely touch your supper, in the way you stare out at the yard, like you are waiting on something to appear." James swallowed hard. His eyes stung. There was something in her voice that undid him, something steady and strong and full of love. He turned his head and met her gaze. "You are all I ever wanted, Sarah," his voice cracked. "You are the only thing that makes sense to me." She brushed her thumb along the back of his hand. "Then let me be here with you. Let me love you through this." James leaned forward slightly, as if drawn to her by a force he could not resist. Her presence soothed something raw inside him. She had a way of quieting storms without ever raising her voice. She had done it since the day they met in the little store where she worked. He could still remember the way she smiled at him then, shy but steady, as if she saw something in him he did not yet see in himself. Sarah shifted so she could look into his eyes more clearly. "Tell me what you fear most." He exhaled slowly. "I fear making the wrong choice. I fear that I already have." Sarah's expression softened. "You have always tried to do right by us. That has never changed." James looked down at his hands. "I do not feel right. Something feels wrong inside me. I do not know if it is worry or something else." He did not tell her that he felt feverish earlier, or that the dull ache in his back had returned, or that he had paused on the porch before coming inside because he felt dizzy and did not want Isaac to see it. Sarah touched his cheek, turning his face back toward hers. "Whatever it is, you will not face it alone." He held her gaze for a long moment, his heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. Then he reached for her hand, pulling it gently into his lap. "I need you," he whispered. "I need you tonight." Sarah hesitated only a moment, not out of fear, but out of worry for him. She saw the exhaustion in his posture, the faint lines of strain around his eyes. She wanted him to rest. She wanted him to feel safe. She also wanted him to know she was with him, completely, without question. She nodded quietly. "I am here." He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "You and me," he murmured. She smiled softly. "Together forever." He let out a slow, uneven breath. The words wrapped around something deep inside him, something that had been unraveling over the last few weeks. There was comfort in saying them. There was comfort in hearing her repeat them. Outside, the wind brushed lightly against the house, almost like a sigh. The air in the room felt warm and close. Sarah lifted her hand to the back of his neck, smoothing the tension there with her fingers. He inhaled sharply, the touch pulling him closer to her. This moment felt like a refuge, a place untouched by doctors or papers or promises or fear. It felt like the world pausing just long enough for them to remember what steadied them. James lifted her chin gently, and she met his kiss with quiet certainty. The closeness between them felt full of meaning, a reassurance exchanged in silence. Sarah held him with the same tenderness she offered in every part of their life, and James held her as if she were the last piece of solid ground left beneath him. When their foreheads rested together again, Sarah whispered, "You are shaking." "I know," he said. "I cannot seem to stop." She pressed her palms against his cheeks. "Then let me hold you. You do not have to fight the shaking alone." He let himself sink into her embrace, the tension in his shoulders giving way little by little. Her heartbeat was steady beneath his hand. The warmth of her skin felt grounding, anchoring him to something real. He breathed her name softly. "Sarah." She rested her hand on his chest. "I am right here." The lamp flickered slightly. The floorboards creaked as the house settled for the night, as if settling its weight around the two of them. Sarah's breath moved gently against his throat. The warmth of her body against his eased something raw inside him, something he had not known how to soothe on his own. Whatever fear lived in him shifted, softened, retreated for a moment beneath the weight of their closeness. They held each other for a long time, speaking only in soft whispers, touches, and breaths that rose and fell in quiet rhythm. When the night finally eased them into stillness, James felt a fragile sense of calm he had not felt in weeks. He thought, just for a moment, that maybe things would turn out all right after all. Sarah pressed her lips to his temple. "I love you," she whispered. He closed his eyes and let the words wash over him. "I love you too," he said, "more than anything." And the house, as if listening, seemed to hold its breath around them. Later, the house grew quieter than usual. Isaac had fallen asleep hours before, worn out from the long day. His soft snores drifted faintly through the thin wall that separated his room from theirs. Outside, the chorus of insects continued, but even that seemed muted, as if the world were giving them this one fragile pocket of stillness. James lay on his back, staring at the dim shape of the ceiling. Sarah rested against him, her head on his shoulder, one arm draped across his chest. Their bodies were still, but neither of them slept yet. Both seemed to be listening to something they could not quite name. Sarah could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm. It was slower now, but every once in a while it quickened, as though some thought or memory had startled it. She listened to the rhythm and let it calm her fears. Whatever the world had planned for them, they were here in this moment, held together by something no paper could define. "You are warm," she murmured. James turned his head slightly. "Too warm?" She hesitated. "Warmer than your usual." He lifted the back of his hand to his forehead and then to his cheek. "Maybe the room is just holding the day's heat," he said. "Or maybe it is from everything weighing on me." She listened carefully to the sound of his breathing. There was a thickness to it that she did not like, but she told herself it was only exhaustion. He reached for her hand again and pressed it to his chest. "This is the only place I feel steady," he whispered, "right here with you." Sarah's eyes glistened in the low light. "Then stay steady with me," she said softly. "When the world shakes, we hold on to each other." He exhaled slowly, letting those words sink deep. For a long while they lay together, whispering about smaller things. About Isaac's growing feet that seemed to outpace his clothes. About how the corn crop might turn out if the rain held steady. About the way the choir sounded last Sunday when Sister Louise hit the high note in the hymn and everyone in the pews felt the air lift. It felt good to talk about ordinary things. For a little while, the conversation pulled them away from the heavy shadow of doctors and tests and paper promises. It allowed them to remember there was a life outside all of that, a life they had built with their own hands and their own sacrifices. At one point, James coughed softly and turned his face away. Sarah sat up slightly. "You all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said quickly, "just a little dry in the throat." She studied him for a moment. There was a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. She reached over to the small table beside the bed, dipped a cloth into the basin of cool water, and wrung it out. Then she placed it gently against his forehead. He closed his eyes as the coolness touched his skin. "That feels good," he murmured. She smoothed the cloth along his temple. "You have always run a little warm when you are worn down," she said. "You remember that winter when you worked through the rain? You came home burning up." He managed a small smile. "You fussed over me for a whole week." "And you needed every bit of it," she replied. "Hard-headed as you are, your body still needs tending." Her fingers brushed along his hairline, her touch full of tenderness. She did not see this as anything more than a man who had pushed himself and now felt the cost. People in Macon County lived with aches and fevers all the time. It was part of the life they knew. If anything, she saw this as one more test of the strength they had always shared. James reached up and covered her hand with his. "Thank you," he whispered. "You would do the same for me," she said. A flicker of pain crossed his features. "I hope I never have to." She gave him a soft look. "No one lives a life free of needing care, James. That is part of the promise. You and me, together forever. Not just when things are light, but when things are heavy." The words moved through him like a blessing and a warning at once. He tugged her gently back down beside him until her head rested on his chest again. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close with a kind of gentle urgency. He breathed in the familiar scent of her hair, a mixture of soap and kitchen and sunlight, and tried to memorize it as if he feared it might someday be taken from him. After a while, his breathing evened out. She listened as the tension slowly unwound from his muscles. His hand, which had been clenched against her side, finally relaxed. His body grew heavier in the way bodies do when sleep begins to loosen their hold on wakefulness. Sarah did not sleep right away. She listened to his breathing, to the sounds of the house, to the rustle of wind beyond the walls. She watched the faint lamplight fade as the oil burned down. The room darkened until everything was shadows and soft outlines. When she finally drifted into sleep, it was with the feeling of his arms still around her, his warmth soaking through the thin cotton of her nightclothes. Time slipped by in small pieces. At some point deep in the night, James stirred. A dull ache pulsed through his joints. His head throbbed at the temples. His throat felt thick and dry. For a brief moment, he woke enough to feel disoriented, unsure of where he was. Then he felt Sarah pressed against him and remembered. He lifted a hand to his face. The cloth she had placed there earlier had fallen onto the pillow. He moved it aside. Sarah shifted in her sleep and murmured something he could not quite catch. It sounded like his name. He turned slightly, wincing at a faint pull in his lower back. The pain was not sharp, just a deep ache that seemed to live inside the bone itself. He breathed out slowly and settled again, his arm finding its way back around her without conscious thought. She sighed with contentment and stilled once more. Despite the discomfort, there was something about this closeness that anchored him. The world outside the bedroom felt far away. The doctors and their plans, nothing more than a distant threat in that moment. Here, in the quiet dark, he had the one thing he knew was real, the one thing he could trust without question. He pressed his lips lightly to her hair. "You and me," he whispered, not even sure if he had spoken aloud. If the house heard, it gave no sign. Eventually, sleep pulled him under again, heavy and deep. When the first light of dawn slipped through the curtain and drew a pale line across the floor, Sarah woke to the sound of birdsong. For a moment, she did not move. She lay there listening, feeling the rise and fall of James's chest beneath her cheek. He was still warm, perhaps a little too warm, but his breathing was steady, not labored. Slowly, carefully, she eased herself up so she could look at him. His face, even in rest, carried a faint furrow between his brows, as if his body could not fully let go of strain. His skin had the flushed look of someone who had spent a long day in the sun. She rested the back of her hand against his forehead. "Still warm," she murmured. He stirred and opened his eyes, blinking at the brightness of the room. "Morning already?" "It is," she said softly. "The birds woke up before we did." He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and tried to sit up. A twist of discomfort tugged at his spine, but he bit back the groan. Sarah saw the way his jaw clenched. "There it is again," she said. "You're back." He forced a smile. "Could be the mattress," he joked weakly, "or all those years chopping wood." She gave him a look that said she did not fully buy the excuse. "Let me get breakfast started," she said. "You sit a moment. Do not rush." He moved to stand anyway, more out of habit than pride, and his legs felt heavier than usual, as if they had been carrying an invisible weight through the night. The room swayed once, very slightly, and he steadied himself with a hand on the bed frame. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched him. "James, you need to take it slow." "I am all right," he said. "Just got up too fast." He straightened and took a breath, letting the dizziness pass. Then he reached for her hand and squeezed it. "Last night helped," he said quietly. Her features softened. "Helped how?" "It reminded me that I still have something good," he said, "something worth fighting for. No matter what the doctors say, no matter what they do." She squeezed his hand in return. "We have always had that," she said. "They cannot touch what was made between us." A small smile tugged at his mouth. It felt good to hear her say it. She leaned in and kissed him once more, slow and steady, before stepping away. "Go check on Isaac," she said. "Make sure he is up for school. I will see what we can put together for breakfast." He nodded and watched her for a moment as she moved toward the kitchen. There was a slight stiffness in her step that he might have missed on another day. She paused at the doorframe, placing her hand there briefly, as if catching herself. Then she continued on. "Just a little tired," he told himself. "Just the weight of worry, nothing more." He turned down the hall to wake Isaac. The day began as so many others had, with small routines, with familiar voices, with the sound of water poured into a basin and the scrape of chairs across the floor, with the smell of bread and coffee and wood smoke. Yet beneath these ordinary details, something unseen had shifted. A seed of sickness that neither of them could name had already begun its quiet work. Later, much later, when James would sit in a quiet room listening to the words of a president confessing what had been done to them, his mind would travel back to this night, to this room, to this moment. He would remember the warmth of her beside him. He would remember the feel of her hand on his chest. He would remember the way they whispered their promise, "You and me, together forever." And he would understand that in the eyes of the men who watched and recorded and measured and reported, that promise had never once been considered. Only the numbers, only the data, only the path of the disease they were willing to let run its course. But that knowledge belonged to a future he could not yet see. For now, as the sun climbed slowly into the sky and the house shook off the remnants of night, James stepped into the day, believing that love alone would be strong enough to hold them. The house, which had held its breath through the night, exhaled with the morning. Unseen, the consequences of that night moved quietly forward. Chapter 19. A Door Left Ajar. The days after the Army rejection came wrapped in a kind of dull quiet that did not match the noise inside James's head. On the surface, life went on as it always had. The rooster still crowed at dawn. The sun still rose over the tree line. The wood yard still needed hands. Isaac still laughed at simple things, chasing butterflies and rolling in the grass. But James moved through it all as if there were a pane of glass between him and the world. He could see everything. He could touch almost nothing. The paper with the word "rejected" stamped across the top sat folded in the top drawer of his small dresser. He knew exactly where it was. He tried not to look at it, but often, late at night, his mind went straight to it, as though the letters themselves had weight. Some mornings he would wake with a moment of forgetting, a second when he believed the hope was still alive, that maybe in a few weeks he would be in uniform, that money would arrive steady as the seasons, that he had broken the pattern. Then the truth returned. He had not broken anything. Something had broken him. One evening at supper, Isaac chattered happily about seeing a raccoon near the creek. He waved his spoon as he spoke, splattering bits of stew on the table. Sarah smiled, her eyes fond, but there was a sadness at the edges of her expression that never fully left. James ate slowly, barely tasting the food. His thoughts were stuck between the army doctor's tight expression and Nurse Whitford's soft, reassuring voice at Shiloh. "Daddy, are you listening?" Isaac asked. James blinked and looked at his son. "I am, baby. A raccoon by the creek, you say?" Isaac grinned. "Yes. He washed his food in the water like Mama washes our clothes." Sarah laughed quietly. "You better not tell him I wash his socks in the creek like a raccoon." Isaac giggled. For a brief moment, joy brushed the room. Then it faded, pulled away by the tide of James's worry. After supper, Sarah sent Isaac to wash up and turned to James. "Have you thought about talking to anyone at the church?" she asked. "About what?" About what the Army said, about you being part of a federal medical program, about those men who tested you. James's shoulders slumped. Who would I talk to? Pastor Collins only knows what they told him, and that was not much. Maybe he knows more now, she said quietly. Maybe he has seen something. James rubbed his forehead. What would I even say to him? That my blood is now in more places than it should be? That men in uniform refused me and sent me back home like I was broken goods? That is not what you are, Sarah said firmly. He looked at her. It is what it feels like. She moved closer and touched his cheek. You are still the man I married. You are still the father of my child. You are still the man who gets up before sunrise to work and still prays before every meal. Nothing they wrote on that paper can change that. Tears stung his eyes. He blinked them away. You and me, he whispered. She leaned her forehead against his. Together forever. 3 days later, the government car returned. The same dark sedan rolled slowly up the long dirt road, its tires kicking up thin clouds of dust. The sound of the engine broke the quiet afternoon. Isaac was playing with a stick and a small pile of stones near the porch steps. He turned at the noise. "Mama, someone is here," he called. Sarah stepped onto the porch and froze when she saw the car. James came from behind the house, wiping sweat from his brow. The moment he saw the sedan, his stomach dropped. 2 men stepped out, Dr. Stevens and Dr. Randall. Nurse Whitford emerged from the back seat, clutching her clipboard. Her eyes went immediately to James. "Afternoon, Mr. Turner," Dr. Stevens said, his voice smooth as ever. James's jaw tightened. "Afternoon." "We hope it is not a bad time," the doctor went on, as if he had come to borrow sugar. "We wanted to follow up on your examination, as we said we would." Sarah crossed her arms, standing between them and the open doorway. What is this really about? Nurse Whitford walked a little closer, her face soft, almost apologetic. "We heard," she said quietly, "that you went to the Army testing center." James felt his heart thud hard in his chest. "How did you hear that?" "The systems are connected," Dr. Stevens replied. "Your name is flagged as someone enrolled in our care program. It was noted." "Care," James repeated. The word tasted bitter. "I do not remember enrolling in anything." "You signed a form at Shiloh," Stevens said. "Standard protocol. You consented to continued observation and follow-up. It is all within federal guidelines." James felt sick. "That day at church, I thought I was just getting a checkup." "You were," the doctor said, "and your participation also helps us understand the health of men in your community. You are part of something important." James took a step closer. "Because of whatever you did, the Army would not take me." "That decision was theirs," Stevens replied. "We only provide the medical information." "So something in that information made them refuse me," James said. "What was it?" The doctor's expression shifted, turning more serious. "You have what we call bad blood," he said. James stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It is a general term," Stevens replied. "Covers several conditions. Nothing you need to panic over. But it is something we are studying, and you are an important part of that study." Sarah stepped down from the porch, placing herself slightly in front of James. "Studying?" she said. "Studying what?" "Health patterns in colored men," Stevens said. "We want to learn how to treat your communities better. It is for the greater good." Evelyn cleared her throat softly. "We are monitoring men like your husband long-term, watching how the condition progresses, how the body responds. It will help future generations." Sarah's eyes flashed. "You mean you are watching what happens to him without fixing it?" Dr. Randall spoke for the first time. "Treatment is not always the first step. Observation can be just as valuable." James felt something inside him twist. "So you know something is wrong?" he said slowly. "And you will not help me? You will just watch?" "Mr. Turner," Stevens said calmly, "we are helping you. You receive regular examinations, visits from a nurse, transportation when needed, small stipends. You will receive more medical attention than most men in this county ever see." James thought of the rejection stamp. The way the army door had closed in his face. He pictured that word again, rejected. "You did not answer my question," he said quietly. Stevens raised an eyebrow. "Which question?" "What exactly is wrong with me?" James asked. Silence settled over the yard. Even the birds seemed to quiet. Nurse Whitford looked down at her clipboard. Finally, Stevens said, "You have a venereal condition, something we refer to as syphilitic infection. It has been in your blood for some time." The words sank like stones into James's stomach. "Syphilis," he repeated. The word sounded almost foreign in his mouth. "From what? When?" "It is difficult to pinpoint," Stevens replied. "But based on your blood work, you are in the latent stage. The disease is no longer active on the surface. That makes you ideal for our observations." Sarah's face went pale. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You must be mistaken," she whispered. "James is—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. James's mind raced back over his life. Every touch, every embrace, every choice. "I do not feel sick," he said faintly. "Precisely," Stevens said, as if pleased. "That is why you are perfect for this. Men like you walk around not even knowing. With your participation, we can see the long-term effects clearly." Sarah's voice shook. "So you know he has a disease, and you will not treat it?" Stevens gave a small shrug. "There are treatments, some harsh, some unreliable. Our goal at this stage is not intervention, it is understanding. You will still receive care, food when you come to us, occasional medicine for pain, assistance as needed." "That is not care," Sarah said. Tears welled in her eyes. "That is neglect dressed up as kindness." Nurse Whitford flinched. Dr. Randall shifted his weight. "Mrs. Turner, I know this is difficult to hear." "You do not know anything about what this feels like," she snapped. "You can go back to wherever you came from. We have to stay here with this." Evelyn took a small step forward, her eyes full of something like sorrow. "Sarah," she said softly, "I promise you, we are not trying to harm you." Sarah turned on her. "Then what are you doing?" Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, her face seemed to crack, as if something she had been holding back finally pressed too hard against the surface. She looked at James. "I have been visiting the homes of men in this program for some time," she said quietly. "I see their families, their wives, their children. I know their names, their stories. I would not be here if I believed we were doing pure harm. But I also cannot stand here and pretend this is simple." Stephen's expression sharpened. "Nurse Whitford." She straightened but did not look at him. "Mr. Turner," Stephen said, regaining his official tone, "the government has invested resources in monitoring your condition. You will receive long-term observation. There is value in that, scientific value." James could not look at him. His gaze dropped to the ground. "My whole life," he said slowly, "I have tried to do right. I have worked. I have prayed. I have taken care of my family. And now you stand here telling me there is something wrong with my blood? And your answer is to watch me? Like I am some animal in a pen?" "Like you are a subject of important study," Stevens corrected. "Your participation will help many." "And what about my son?" James asked, his voice trembling. "What about my wife? What about this house, this land? What about the life I am living right now? Does your study help that?" Stevens said nothing. Sarah moved closer to James, slipping her arms around his. "We will find our own care," she said. "We do not need you." Evelyn's voice softened. "Finding care elsewhere may not be easy. Our program covers your costs. Without it, you may receive nothing." "Nothing sounds better than what you just described," Sarah said. James's head spun. He felt caught between two cliffs, the drop below invisible. He knew almost nothing about this disease they named. He knew nothing about how it worked, how it moved inside a body, how it would end. And yet the people standing in front of him seemed to know a great deal. He felt trapped. "We would like to schedule your next visit," Stevens said, as though they had been discussing something as ordinary as a toothache. "We will be holding further examinations at Shiloh. You will receive another stipend." "I am not sure I will come," James said. Stevens's jaw tightened. "Your continued participation is expected. You signed an agreement." James looked at him with sudden anger. "I signed a piece of paper I could barely read in a church I trusted, with a nurse whose face looked kind. That is not the same as understanding." Evelyn flinched again. Stevens adjusted his glasses. "You are part of the program now. It is in your interest to cooperate. Refusal could complicate matters." James felt a chill creep down his spine. "Is that a threat?" Sarah demanded. The doctor smiled faintly. "Of course not. It is simply the reality of working with federal systems." He handed James a folded notice. "We expect you at Shiloh in 2 weeks' time." The men turned back toward the car. Evelyn lingered for a moment. She looked at James and Sarah with eyes that seemed older than her face. "I will see you soon," she said softly. "Please, take care of yourselves." Sarah stared at her. "We will, whether you come back or not." Evelyn held her gaze, then lowered her eyes and followed the men to the car. The sedan pulled away, the tires leaving shallow tracks in the dirt. When they were gone, the yard fell strangely silent. James stood there, the notice crumpling in his fist. His heart pounded. His thoughts spun. Sarah turned to face him. "They are not doctors," she whispered. "They may have the training, they may wear the coats, but people who truly care do not talk like that." James could not answer. His mind was back at the Army building, back at the word rejected, back at the moment the sergeant said he was already in a federal program. He opened his hand and looked down at the notice. The writing blurred for a second as his vision wavered. He blinked hard until it cleared. "James?" Sarah asked. He looked at her, his eyes full of fear and quiet rage. "They have my blood," he said, "and now they think they have me." Sarah stepped close and set her hands on his chest as if she could hold him together by force of will alone. "You are not theirs," she said fiercely. "You are mine. You are Isaac's. You are God's. They do not own you." His throat tightened. He wrapped his arms around her, holding on as if he were clinging to a tree in a rising flood. "You and me," he whispered, though the words shook now. She answered, tears streaming down her face. "Together, forever." But as the sun lowered behind the trees and the shadows in the yard grew longer, James could not shake the feeling that something had shifted in a way none of them could undo. A door had been opened. He had stepped through, and now the lock was on the other side.